Emily Carter never imagined her marriage would reach a point where silence spoke louder than love. She and David had been together for 12 years, a couple everyone admired. They lived in a quiet Portland neighborhood, surrounded by trees and laughter from nearby families. On the outside, they looked perfect: stable jobs, a lovely daughter named Lily, and a cozy home filled with framed memories. But behind the closed doors, something was changing, something Emily didn't know how to fix. It began gradually. David's late nights at the office became routine. The excuses, meetings, deadlines, client dinners were always the same, and Emily believed him every time. But she couldn't ignore how distant he had become. Their morning conversations shrank into a few polite words about bills and errands. Even when they were together, he seemed elsewhere, lost in thoughts she wasn't a part of. Emily tried to dismiss it. Marriage had its seasons, she told herself. Maybe this was just one of them, a rough patch that would pass. Yet the more she tried to bridge the gap, the wider it grew. The spark that once felt effortless now seemed buried under years of routine and responsibility at work. Emily was different, focused, respected, and confident. She worked as a creative consultant at a design firm downtown. It was there that she met Ethan Blake. He was new, a project manager from Seattle with an easy smile and a calm voice that carried warmth. From the first day, he stood out, not just because of his ideas, but because he listened. When most people interrupted or hurried through conversations, Ethan paid attention. He asked about her opinions, her designs, her thoughts. It was simple, but it made her feel noticed. Their friendship began naturally. They shared the same office coffee breaks, laughed about deadlines, and exchanged stories about life outside work. Emily mentioned her daughter. Ethan mentioned his love for travel and photography. There was nothing romantic at first, just comfort. But comfort can be dangerous when it begins to fill an empty space at home. As weeks turned into months, Emily realized she was looking forward to work more than usual. She caught herself glancing at the clock, anticipating their next chat. Ethan's presence felt easy, light, a reminder of what connection used to feel like. He wasn't flirtatious or forward. He was genuine. One day, during lunch, he told her, "You talk about everyone else with so much care, but you never talk about yourself." Why's that? The question lingered in her mind long after she went home. That night, as she watched David fall asleep with his phone still in his hand, she wondered when she had stopped being seen. Still, Emily didn't want to give up on her marriage. She loved David, not just the man he was, but the years they'd built together. They'd weathered storms before, and she believed they could again. So she tried. She planned dinners, left him sweet notes, even bought tickets for a weekend getaway. But each time, something came up. Work emergencies, canceled plans, last-minute excuses. She felt herself fading from his world. One quiet evening at dinner, when he didn't even notice her new haircut, the loneliness became heavy. And that's when Ethan's small kindnesses began to mean too much. When he brought her coffee on stressful mornings, when he stayed late to help her finish a presentation, when he remembered the little details she mentioned once and never repeated, it all mattered. It wasn't about romance. It was about being seen, being heard. One rainy evening after work, the power went out in the office. Everyone left early except Ethan and Emily, who stayed to finish a client proposal. They sat near the window, light flickering from the street outside, the sound of rain soft and constant. It wasn't silence that filled the room, but a strange understanding. A shared quiet between two people who didn't need to speak to feel connected. Ethan finally broke the silence. Sometimes people stay where they're comfortable, even when it stops feeling right. He said gently. Emily looked at him, unsure how to respond. The words hit deeper than he probably intended. She felt her throat tighten. And sometimes, she whispered, they stay because they don't know how to leave. Their eyes met for a long second, one that said more than either of them could afford to admit. Then Ethan looked away, clearing his throat, returning to the work in front of them. The moment passed, but the air between them had changed forever. That night, Emily drove home in silence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. She wasn't angry, she was scared. Scared of how easy it was to feel drawn to someone who wasn't her husband. Scared of what that said about her? When she reached home, David was asleep on the couch, the TV still on. She stood there staring at him, at the man she had chosen, the father of her child, and she felt both love and distance at once. The next morning she tried to act normal. She made breakfast, packed Lily's lunch, and smiled when David rushed out the door with his usual, "I'll call you later." But that call never came. Over the next few weeks, things between her and David only grew colder. He was buried in work, and she was buried in confusion. Ethan tried to keep their friendship light, but the unspoken emotions between them lingered like an invisible thread neither could cut. Then one afternoon, during a team lunch, Ethan mentioned that he had been offered a new position in Chicago. "I haven't decided yet," he said, looking at her briefly. Emily forced a smile, pretending to be happy for him, but her heart sank. She realized she had started to depend on his presence more than she should have. That evening, after everyone left, Ethan stopped by her office. "If I take the job, I'll be gone next month," he said softly. She nodded, unable to find the right words. The silence stretched between them. Then Ethan added, "You're one of the few people I'll actually miss here." It was a simple line, but it hit her deeply. She wanted to say something back, something honest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just smiled faintly and said, "You'll do great, Ethan." When he left, Emily sat at her desk long after the lights went out. She knew she was standing at a crossroads she didn't ask for. She hadn't done anything wrong, not technically, but emotionally she was already lost somewhere between loyalty and longing. That weekend, she and David attended a friend's anniversary party. Watching the couple renew their vows stirred something inside her. As she listened to them talk about forgiveness, second chances, and growing together through time, Emily felt a sudden ache in her chest. She glanced at David beside her, polite, distant, unaware, and wondered when love had turned into habit. That night she lay awake, her thoughts spinning. She didn't want to destroy her marriage, but she couldn't ignore how deeply she had begun to drift away. She thought about Ethan, about the feeling of being understood, and guilt consumed her. The next morning she opened a blank page in her journal and began to write. Not to confess to anyone else, just to herself. "I don't know when it happened," she wrote, "but I feel like a stranger in my own life. I miss being seen. I miss feeling like I matter." She closed the journal, hid it under a pile of books, and went about her day. But deep down she knew the truth. She was standing on the edge of something that could change everything, and as much as she wanted to pull back, fate was already writing the next chapter. David wasn't supposed to be home that early. The office had a sudden power outage, and he decided to surprise Emily with dinner. When he stepped into the kitchen, the quietness of the house greeted him. He placed the takeout bags on the counter and looked around. Lily was at a friend's house, and Emily wasn't back from work yet. He smiled faintly, imagining her walking through the door to the smell of food. But as he set the table, his eyes caught something resting near the edge, a small, leather-bound journal. He didn't mean to open it, but the page was already slightly folded, and the words written there pulled his eyes before he could stop himself. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, careful, but shaky in places. He read just one line at first. "I miss being seen. I miss feeling like I matter." The words hit him harder than he expected. He froze, rereading them as if hoping he'd misunderstood. Then came another line. "I feel like a stranger in my own life." His chest tightened. For the first time in months, maybe years, David realized how far apart they'd grown. When Emily came home, she saw him sitting at the table, the journal closed in front of him. The silence between them was heavy. "You read it?" she said quietly, not even asking. David looked up, guilt in his eyes. "I didn't mean to." "It was open." He paused, struggling for words. "Is this really how you feel?" Emily stood frozen by the doorway, her bag still hanging from her shoulder. She wanted to be angry, but she couldn't. She sighed, setting her bag down. "I didn't write it for you to read. I just needed somewhere to put what I couldn't say out loud." He looked at her for a long time, his expression a mix of hurt and confusion. "Then why didn't you tell me? I thought we were okay." She shook her head gently. No, David, we've been pretending we're okay. There's a difference. The honesty in her voice cut through the air like glass. David didn't know what to say. For years, he had been buried in work, trying to secure their future, believing he was doing the right thing. But somewhere in that process, he had stopped being present. I know I've been distant, he said quietly. I thought I was doing all this for us. For you, for Lily. I didn't realize I was losing you in the process. Emily's eyes softened. I know you were trying. But I was lonely, David. Not just alone. Lonely with you right there beside me. He reached across the table, hesitating before taking her hand. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air like thunder. Emily's heart raced. No, she said quickly. There's no one else. She wasn't lying, not physically. But emotionally. That was harder to answer. David nodded slowly, as if convincing himself to believe her. Then let's fix this. Tell me what to do. But repairing something broken wasn't as simple as saying sorry. Emily didn't even know where to start. I don't know if we can just fix it, she whispered. It's not one thing, David, it's everything that's built up. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. They were polite, overly so, careful not to say the wrong thing. It felt like walking on glass. Emily wanted to find her way back to him. But she couldn't force feelings that had grown faint. Meanwhile, Ethan's upcoming departure was looming. The thought of him leaving stirred a strange ache inside her, one she didn't fully understand or want to. She tried to avoid him at work, keeping their interactions short and professional. But on his last week, he stopped by her office one final time. I wanted to say goodbye in person, he said softly. It's been great working with you, Emily. You've made this place feel like home. She smiled, keeping her tone steady. You'll do amazing in Chicago. They're lucky to have you. There was a pause, the kind that holds more meaning than words. Then Ethan said, take care of yourself, okay? You deserve to be happy. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. You too, Ethan. When he left, she sat in silence for a long time, staring at the empty space he'd occupied. She wasn't in love with him, not really. But he had reminded her of something she'd forgotten, what it felt like to be valued. That evening, she came home to find David cooking dinner. The smell of pasta and garlic filled the kitchen, and for a brief moment it felt like old times. You're cooking? She asked, surprised. He smiled awkwardly. Trying to. I figured I've been gone enough lately. I should be here for once. Wasn't perfect, the sauce was too thick and he burned the bread, but it made Emily laugh for the first time in weeks. That laughter, small as it was, broke the tension. They ate together, talked about Lily, and even shared memories from their early years. For a few moments, it felt like the distance between them might shrink after all. But later that night, as Emily cleaned the dishes, David said something that made her pause. You know, I've been thinking, maybe we should take a trip. It's just us. No phones, no work, no distractions. She looked at him, surprised. You really mean that? He nodded. Yeah, I don't want to lose us, Em. I've already been gone too long. For the first time in a long while, she saw sincerity in his eyes. The man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. She smiled faintly. Okay, she said. Let's try. Over the next week, David put in the effort she'd been craving for years. He came home early, helped around the house, and actually listened when she spoke. He even took an interest in her work. Emily wanted to believe it would last, that maybe this was their turning point. But deep down she couldn't ignore the fear that it was temporary, a reaction to guilt rather than change. One Friday night, as they packed for their weekend trip, Emily received a message from Ethan. It was short and simple. Boarding now. Just wanted to say goodbye one last time. Thank you for everything. She read it twice before putting her phone away. She didn't reply, but something inside her stirred. A quiet goodbye, not just to him, but to a version of herself that had been lost. The trip started well. They drove to a cabin near Lake Tahoe, surrounded by tall pines and quiet water. The air was crisp, and for the first time in months, they felt at peace. They cooked together, laughed, and watched the sun set over the lake. It almost felt like healing. But on the second night, as they sat by the fire, David brought up the journal again. "I keep thinking about what you wrote," he said softly. "You said you felt unseen. I don't understand how I missed that." Emily looked at the fire, her voice calm but firm. "Because you weren't looking. You were chasing something else. Success, security, maybe your own fears. I was right here, David." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to lose you, Em. But if there's something else you need, if you found something I can't give you, I'd rather know." Her eyes met his. "There's no one else," she said again, this time more sure of it. "But there was a part of me that felt alive for the first time in years, and that scared me." David nodded slowly, absorbing her honesty. "Then let's start over," he said. "Not as who we were, but as who we are now." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard. Maybe, just maybe, this trip was the beginning of something new. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt hope flicker again, as they sat together in the quiet cabin. Listening to the wind outside, Emily thought of the word forgiveness. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase the pain. But maybe it was the only way forward. And yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of their story was still ahead. The weekend at the cabin had felt like a fragile truce, a small bridge over deep waters. Emily and David drove home in quiet comfort, the air between them softer than it had been in months. But when they reached their doorstep, a single white envelope was waiting in the mailbox. It was simple, no return address, just her name written in neat, familiar handwriting. Emily froze when she saw it. She didn't need to guess who it was from. Ethan. David noticed her hesitation. "Who's it from?" he asked casually. "Just work mail," she said quickly, sliding the envelope into her bag before he could see it. He didn't think twice, turning to unload their luggage. But Emily's heart was already racing. That night, long after David had fallen asleep, she sat alone in the living room. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the fireplace. Her fingers trembled as she opened the letter. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Emily, I hope you're doing well. I didn't mean to stir up any confusion in your life. I just wanted to say thank you, not for what happened, but for reminding me that connection still exists in a world full of noise. You once said you felt invisible. I hope you never feel that way again. Take care, Ethan." The letter was short but heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily read it twice, then folded it carefully. There was nothing romantic in his words. Yet they carried the weight of what almost was and what she knew could never be. The next morning, she tucked the letter into a drawer, deciding to let it go. She didn't reply, but part of her felt strangely lighter. It was as if the universe had given her a choice to keep holding on to the past or finally release it. Days turned into weeks. Life seemed to return to routine. David was making more effort than ever before. He came home early, asked about her day, and they even started taking walks together after dinner. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt him trying, really trying. One evening, while walking through the park, he said something that made her stop. "I've been offered a position in Seattle. It's a promotion, but it means more travel again. Before, I would have said yes right away. But now, I don't want to lose what we're rebuilding." Emily looked at him, touched. "Then don't," she said softly. "We've both given too much time to everything but us." He nodded. "I turned it down this morning." That simple confession meant more to her than any grand gesture ever could. For the first time in years, she saw the man she'd married, not the one buried in spreadsheets and deadlines, but the one who used to stay up with her all night, talking about dreams. Slowly, the distance between them began to fade. There were still awkward moments, small reminders of how far apart they'd drifted. But they were learning to be patient with each other again. Still, deep down, Emily knew rebuilding trust wasn't easy. She hadn't done anything wrong. Not technically, but she had walked dangerously close to a line. And part of her wondered if David sensed that. One night while cleaning her drawer, she found the letter again. She stared at it for a long moment, then took it outside. Standing under the pale moonlight, she lit it with a match. The paper curled and blackened, the words disappearing into smoke. It wasn't out of guilt, it was closure. Inside the house, David saw her through the window and stepped outside. "What are you doing?" She turned, smiling softly. "Letting go." He didn't ask what she meant. He just walked up, wrapped his arm around her, and they stood there in silence, watching the ashes drift into the night. In the weeks that followed, they found small ways to rediscover each other. Weekend breakfasts, movie nights, even simple things like holding hands while driving. It wasn't perfect, nothing was, but it was real. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Lily came home early from a friend's house, holding her phone with a worried expression. "Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad?" Emily froze. "Of course. Why do you ask?" Lily hesitated. I heard you guys fighting a lot before. I thought maybe—" Emily's heart ached. She knelt down, taking her daughter's hands. "We're okay, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups lose their way for a little while, but we're finding it again." David joined them, resting a hand on Lily's shoulder. "We love each other and we love you. That's not going to change." Lily smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt warm again, not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. As months passed, life quietly settled. Emily noticed that her heart no longer raced at the thought of Ethan. Instead, when she thought of love, she thought of home, imperfect, messy, but deeply hers. One afternoon, while sorting old photos, she found a picture of her and David from their early years, both younger, smiling at something unseen. She stared at it for a long time, realizing how far they'd come. They hadn't just survived the storm, they'd rebuilt from it. That evening when David came home, she handed him the photo. "We should take another one like this someday," she said. He smiled, looking at the picture. "How about tonight?" They laughed, took a selfie in their kitchen. No filters, no poses, just them. It wasn't picture perfect, but it felt real. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, David spoke quietly. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't stopped to fix things?" Emily nodded. "All the time. But maybe we had to break a little to learn what really mattered." He looked at her, his expression full of gratitude and love. "I don't ever want to lose you again." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then don't." For the first time in a long time, Emily felt peace. Not because everything had gone back to how it was, but because she'd chosen the life she truly wanted. The affair that almost ended everything had instead become the turning point that saved it. But fate had one last quiet test. Months later, as autumn arrived, Emily received an invitation to a work conference in Chicago. Her heart skipped a beat when she read the location, but she smiled. Life had a sense of humor sometimes. When she told David, he simply said, "You should go." "You've earned it." She went, not with fear or guilt, but with clarity. On the last day of the conference, while walking by the river, she thought about the past, the loneliness, the near mistakes, the forgiveness. It all felt like a different lifetime. The city lights reflected in the water. And for the first time, she didn't feel haunted by memories. She felt grateful for the lessons, the pain, and the love that had survived both. That evening, she called David. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "Were you now?" he teased. "I was just missing you here." Lily made dinner, but it's edible at best. She laughed, feeling warmth spread through her. "Tell her I'll fix it when I get home." When she returned 2 days later, David met her at the airport. He wrapped her in a hug that felt like coming home after a long journey. No words were needed. Everything they'd been through, the distance, the heartbreak, the almost loss, had led them here. Stronger, wiser, together. That night, Emily stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The world outside seemed unchanged, but inside, everything was different. Sometimes love didn't look like fairy tales or grand gestures. Sometimes it was the quiet choice to stay, to rebuild, to forgive. Emily knew she'd once stood on the edge of losing everything. Her marriage, her peace, herself. But in walking back from that edge, she had found not just love again, but herself. And as she watched David sleeping beside her, she whispered softly to the night, "We made it." Michael Turner's life had become quiet, almost too quiet. His days were filled with the same routines: early mornings, silent breakfasts, long hours at the architecture firm, and peaceful but lonely evenings in his home just outside Seattle. It had been for years since his wife passed away, and though time softened the pain, it left behind a kind of emptiness he couldn't name. His daughter Emily was his only anchor. She was 20 now, in her second year of college, full of energy and always surrounded by friends. Her laughter had brought life back into the house that Friday afternoon. Michael came home early, hoping to spend the evening with his daughter. When he walked through the door, he heard voices, Emily's, and another softer one that sounded familiar. When he turned the corner, he froze. Sitting on the kitchen counter, smiling like she had never left, was Sophie Bennett. "Mr. Turner," she said with that bright, warm smile he remembered from years ago. "Sophie?" he said, surprised. "It's been ages." "It has," she replied, sliding down from the counter. "I'm back in town for a bit. Just moved back from Chicago." Emily grinned. "Sophie's staying here for a few days until she finds her own apartment." "You don't mind, right, Dad?" "Of course not," he said, though he felt a sudden, strange flutter in his chest. That evening, as the three of them ate dinner, Michael couldn't help noticing how much Sophie had changed. The last time he saw her, she was 17, a high school senior full of big dreams and reckless laughter. Now she was 24, calm and confident, with a quiet glow about her. The way she carried herself was different, poised, almost graceful. She talked about her years in Chicago, her design degree, her short stint at an interior firm, and how she missed the slower pace of the Pacific Northwest. Michael listened with genuine interest, though a part of him felt uneasy about how icily her presence filled the room. She laughed at his jokes, remembered details from her teenage years, and asked questions about his life with a maturity that surprised him. For a moment, he forgot she was once just Emily's friend. Later that night, when Emily went out with other friends, Sophie stayed back, helping him clean the dishes. "You've kept the house almost exactly the same," she said, glancing around the kitchen. "It feels nostalgic." He smiled faintly. "I'm not much for change, I guess." She tilted her head. "Sometimes change is what we need." There was something in the way she said it, not flirtatious, but deeply reflective. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Michael looked away first, suddenly aware of the silence between them. After Sophie went to bed in the guest room, Michael sat in his study, staring out at the quiet night. He told himself not to think too much. She was just Emily's friend, a guest. Yet something about her presence stirred an ache he hadn't felt in years, an ache that wasn't entirely comfortable, but not unwelcome either. The next morning, Sophie joined him in the kitchen early, her hair loosely tied, a mug of coffee in her hands. "You're up early," she said, smiling. "Old habits," he replied. "Can't seem to sleep in anymore." They talked easily like old friends. She told him about her struggles in Chicago, how city life had drained her, how she longed for quieter days. He listened, really listened, and realized how good it felt to have someone understand the loneliness he'd learned to hide. When Emily came down later, she noticed the two of them laughing over something trivial. "Wow," she said teasingly. "You two are getting along pretty well." Michael smiled awkwardly, brushing it off. But Sophie didn't seem bothered. She just grinned and said, "Your dad's actually funny once he warms up." The weekend passed quickly. Sophie helped Emily reorganize her room, cooked dinner with them, and joined Michael for a few evening walks around the neighborhood. Each time their conversations grew a little deeper. She asked about his late wife, how he handled loss, how he raised Emily alone, how he managed to keep so calm through everything. He wasn't used to being seen that way, like a person with stories instead of just a father. One evening, while Emily was studying at a friend's house, Sophie sat with him on the porch. The rain had just stopped, and the air smelled of wet cedar and earth. "I used to come here all the time," she said quietly, "back when Emily's mom was alive. She used to make hot cocoa for us after school." Michael nodded, his chest tightening at the memory. "She liked having you around. Said you brought sunshine into the house." Sophie looked at him then, her eyes soft. "And you never changed. Always steady, always kind. Even when things were hard." He looked at her for a long moment, unsure how to respond. She smiled faintly and looked away, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Chicago changed me," she said. "It taught me that not everyone has the heart you do." Michael. It was the first time she said his name, and for some reason, it echoed inside him that night after she went to bed. Michael found himself thinking about the way she'd said it. He felt ridiculous, too old to be affected by something so small. Yet there was no denying that Sophie's presence had unsettled something deep within him. Over the next few days, he tried to keep his distance, but it wasn't easy. Sophie was everywhere, humming in the kitchen, working on her laptop in the living room, or sitting quietly on the porch sketching. Every time he saw her, the same thought crept in. She didn't belong to the world of kids anymore. She was a woman now, thoughtful and beautiful in a way that wasn't loud, but deeply graceful. Then one afternoon, when Emily went to class, Michael came home early from work to find Sophie alone. She was in the dining room, rearranging furniture. "You're home early," she said, smiling. "I hope you don't mind. I was trying to see how your living room would look if it were more open." He laughed. "You've turned my house into a design project." "Just a little," she said. "You need some life in here." He watched as she moved a chair, her focus intense, her movements confident. It struck him how easily she brought warmth into a space. He helped her lift a small table, and when their hands brushed for a second, he felt a sudden current, fleeting but powerful. They both froze. She looked up at him, eyes wide, and for a moment, the air between them thickened with something neither wanted to name. Then she laughed nervously and stepped back. "I guess I got carried away." Michael forced a small smile. "It's fine. I needed a change anyway." That night, Emily called to say she was staying with a friend. Michael found himself alone again with Sophie, and with the growing awareness that something was changing. They ate dinner quietly, both avoiding the unspoken tension. But when she thanked him for letting her stay, saying softly, "You've made me feel at home again," his heart stirred in a way it hadn't in years. After she went upstairs, he sat in the living room long after midnight, staring at the space she had rearranged. Everything looked slightly different, lighter somehow. But it wasn't just the furniture. It was him. Something inside him had shifted too. He didn't know where this story was heading, only that it had already begun. The following days unfolded quietly, yet something unspoken hovered between Michael and Sophie. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there in the pauses of their conversations, in the shared glances that lingered a second too long. Michael noticed himself growing aware of the smallest things, the sound of her laughter, light scent of her perfume, the way she'd smile when she caught him looking thoughtful. He didn't understand why he cared so much, but he did. Sophie, on the other hand, seemed to sense the tension too, though she never mentioned it. She carried herself with calm warmth, acting like nothing had changed. She'd wake early, make coffee for them both, and ask him about his work. Sometimes she'd sit across from him at the dining table, working on her laptop, lost in concentration. He admired her discipline, how she seemed focused on building a new chapter in her life. One afternoon, Emily came home, bursting through the door with excitement. "Dad, Sophie found a job. She's joining an interior design company downtown." Michael smiled. "That's great news, Sophie. Congratulations." Sophie grinned. "Thank you. It's a small firm, but they liked my work. I start next week." He felt proud of her, though part of him realized her new job meant she'd soon move out. That thought sat heavier on him than he wanted to admit. The week passed in a blur. Sophie spent her evenings preparing for her job, browsing through designs, and sharing ideas with Michael. They often sat together after dinner, talking about art, work, and life. She'd ask for his advice, and he'd listen, fascinated by how her mind worked. One evening, Emily stayed late at the campus library, and Michael found himself again alone with Sophie. She was sketching something at the dining table, her brow furrowed in focus. Curious, he walked over. "What are you working on?" "Just a layout for the firm's client project," she said without looking up. "They want a modern but warm style. I'm struggling with a lighting arrangement." He sat beside her and looked at her sketch. "You're good at this," he said. "You have a sense of balance that feels natural." She looked at him, surprised. "You really think so?" "Absolutely," he said. "You see things in a way most people miss." She smiled softly, a quiet appreciation in her eyes. "You always say things that stay with me, Michael." The way she said his name again made something stir inside him, not excitement, but a deep human warmth he hadn't felt in years. It reminded him that he was still alive, still capable of connection. That night, after she went upstairs, he sat in the same spot, staring at her sketches. Her handwriting, her little notes, everything had a sense of life and purpose. He admired that about her, how she moved forward despite uncertainty. A few days later, Sophie started her new job. The house felt quieter without her during the day, and Michael noticed the difference immediately. He'd come home from work, and the rooms would feel emptier. Even Emily commented one evening, "You miss Sophie, don't you, Dad?" He smiled awkwardly. "She brings a lot of energy, that's all." Emily nodded. "She does. She's like family." Those words lingered in his mind. Family. He wanted to think of Sophie that way, as part of their family, but the truth was more complicated. There was admiration, respect, and something else he didn't want to name. A week later, on a rainy Thursday evening, Sophie came home looking tired. She kicked off her shoes, smiled weakly, and said, "Work's been crazy this week." Michael poured her a cup of tea. "Then tonight, you rest. Sit down." She laughed. "You sound like my dad." "Maybe I am getting old," he said jokingly. She looked at him for a moment, her expression soft. "You don't seem old to me, Michael. You seem ... steady. The kind of person people trust." There was sincerity in her voice that caught him off guard. He smiled but said nothing, afraid that words might ruin the moment. Over the next few days, their friendship grew stronger. They didn't talk about feelings, but their connection deepened in small ways. Shared dinners, quiet laughter, moments of comfortable silence. Sometimes Emily would tease them, saying they acted like an old married couple, and they'd both laugh it off. But each time, Michael's heart would skip. Just a little. Then came the evening that changed everything. Emily had gone on a weekend trip with her college friends. It was just Michael and Sophie at home. They spent most of the day fixing the garden and cleaning the patio. By the time the sun went down, they were both exhausted. "Pizza?" she asked, sitting on the porch steps. "Sure," he said. They ordered food, sat outside, and watched the rain drizzle softly over the street. The lights from the houses reflected off the wet pavement, painting the neighborhood in gold and gray dots. Sophie leaned back, closing her eyes. "It feels peaceful here. Like nothing bad can touch you." Michael nodded. "That's what I love about this house. It's quiet, safe." She looked at him then, her expression thoughtful. "You built a good life, Michael. Even after everything you went through, you stayed kind. That's rare." He turned toward her, his heart tightening. "It wasn't easy," he said quietly. "There were years when I didn't think I could keep going. But then Emily needed me. That kept me steady." She smiled gently. "You've done more than just stay steady. You've inspired people, even me." The rain grew heavier and they moved under the porch roof. For a long moment, they just sat there, listening to the rain. Sophie broke the silence. "You know, when I was younger, I used to think you were the perfect dad, the kind every kid wished they had. You were always calm, never raised your voice. I didn't realize back then how much strength that takes." Her words hit him harder than he expected. "Strength comes from the people around us," he said softly, "and sometimes from the people we least expect." Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. The moment stretched, quiet, delicate, full of meaning that didn't need to be spoken. Then Sophie smiled faintly, breaking the spell. "I'm glad I came back," she whispered. "This place, it feels like home again." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "I'm glad you did too." That night, he lay awake for a long time, thinking about her words. He knew he was treading dangerous emotional ground, not because anything wrong had happened, but because his heart was slowly awakening in a way he hadn't planned. The next morning, Sophie acted as though nothing had changed. She was cheerful, humming as she made breakfast. Michael followed her lead, grateful for her composure. But the truth was, both of them knew something had shifted quietly, deeply, unavoidably. Days turned into weeks, okay? And Sophie continued living with them until she found her own apartment. The day she came to tell him she'd signed the lease, Michael felt both proud and unexpectedly sad. "That's wonderful," he said, forcing a smile. She nodded, smiling faintly. "It's not far. Just a few blocks away. You'll still see me around. I'll hold you to that," he said. She looked at him for a long second, as though trying to say something else, but then changed her mind. "Thank you, Michael," she said softly, "for everything. You've given me more kindness than I deserve." He wanted to tell her she deserved every bit of it, that her presence had given his life color again. But he stayed silent that evening. As she packed her last box, he stood by the door, unsure of what to say. When she hugged him goodbye, it felt both final and unfinished. "I'll see you soon," she said, smiling. And then she was gone. That night, the house felt unbearably quiet. Emily came home later and asked, "Dad, are you okay?" He nodded, but his heart felt heavy. He told himself it was normal. People come and go, but deep down, he knew something had changed forever. Sophie had brought something back into his life that he hadn't realized he'd lost the courage to feel again. And though she was gone, her presence lingered in every corner of the house, in the laughter that once filled the air, and in the warmth that still lingered on the porch where they watched the rain. He didn't regret a thing, because sometimes the people who enter our lives unexpectedly are the ones who remind us what it means to be alive. Months had passed since Sophie moved into her new apartment, and life in Michael's house had slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Emily had her usual energy back, busy with college projects and friends. Michael still went to work every morning, made dinner at the same time, and sat on the same porch in the evenings. Yet the house felt different. Not empty, but changed. Some evenings, when the light fell softly through the curtains, he caught himself glancing toward the chair Sophie used to sit in. He missed her. He missed her laughter that filled the air like sunlight, the way she brought warmth even on the dullest days. It wasn't something he could explain to anyone, not even to himself fully. It wasn't love, at least not the kind people talk about. It was gratitude mixed with quiet affection, the kind that grows between two souls who've unknowingly helped each other heal. One Saturday morning, Michael received a text. It was from Sophie. "Hey, I'm in the neighborhood. Can I stop by?" His heart lifted. He quickly replied, "Of course. You're always welcome." When she arrived, she looked different, more confident, more mature, like someone who had finally found her place in the world. Her hair was shorter and her eyes sparkled with the calm of someone who'd grown through experience. "Wow," Michael said with a smile. "You look happy?" She laughed softly. "I am. Work's been good and I'm learning a lot." She paused, glancing around. "But this place still feels like home." They talked for hours about her job, her new coworkers, and the projects she was designing. Emily joined in when she came home, and the house once again filled with that familiar laughter Michael had missed so much. When Sophie left that evening, she hugged them both. "You two will always be family to me," she said warmly. Her words stayed with Michael long after she was gone. Family. That was the right word for what they had become. Not something romantic or forbidden, but something deeper, built on care and trust. Yet deep down, he still felt something unresolved. Over the next few months, Sophie visited often. Sometimes she'd drop by for dinner, other times just to share a coffee. She brought new energy each time, telling stories from her workplace and talking about her dreams. Michael listened with quiet admiration, proud of the woman she was becoming. One evening, she invited him and Emily to her apartment. "You both have to see my place now that I've made it cozy," she insisted. When they arrived, her apartment reflected her personality. Warm colors, soft lighting, everything simple yet full of life. Michael looked around and smiled. "You've done an amazing job." "Thank you," she said, her eyes glowing with pride. "You helped me believe I could do this." They had dinner, laughed, and talked until late. Before they left, Sophie walked Michael to the door. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think I was just a guest in your home, but you made me feel like I belonged. I'll never forget that." Michael's throat tightened. "You'll always have a place there," he replied softly. "Always." As months went by, life moved forward. Emily graduated from college and started working in another city, visiting home only occasionally. Michael, now in his 50s, adjusted to the silence of an empty house again. Yet he no longer felt lonely. Sophie had taught him something valuable. That connection didn't end when someone left your home. It lived on in the small ways they changed you. Then, one autumn afternoon, Sophie called him out of the blue. "Michael, can we talk?" Her voice sounded nervous. "Of course," he said. "Is everything okay?" "I just need someone to listen." "Can I come over?" When she arrived, she seemed troubled. She sat down on the porch, just like old times, and took a deep breath. "I made a mistake at work," she confessed. "A client blamed me for something that wasn't entirely my fault. I might lose my position." Michael listened quietly, offering her tea like he always used to. "You're strong, Sophie. You've built yourself up before. You'll do it again." She looked at him, eyes teary. "I'm tired, Michael. I keep trying to be perfect, but I'm scared to fail." He leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep moving forward. People who care about you don't love your perfection. They love your effort." For a moment, she just looked at him. "You always know what to say," she whispered. He smiled softly. "That's because I've made enough mistakes to understand what matters." She laughed through her tears, and in that laughter, the tension broke. The world outside was quiet, filled with the smell of autumn leaves. For a long time, they sat together, not as a man and a young woman with unspoken history, but as two people who understood each other's hearts. Weeks passed, and Sophie resolved her problem at work. She was offered a new project, one that involved traveling to another city for several months. When she told Michael, his heart sank, though he masked it with a proud smile. "That's amazing, Sophie. You deserve it," he said sincerely. She smiled faintly. "I'll miss this porch. It's seen all my breakdowns and recoveries." He chuckled. "It'll always be here, waiting for you." Before she left town, she came by one last time. She brought a small gift, a framed drawing of his house, hand-sketched with delicate details. At the bottom, she had written, "For the man who gave me a home when I needed one." Michael was moved beyond words. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. Sophie smiled. "It's not just your house. It's where I learned what kindness looks like." When she hugged him goodbye, it felt different this time, peaceful, complete. There was no tension, no longing, just gratitude, mutual respect, and quiet affection that didn't need to be explained. After she left, Michael placed the drawing on the mantel. Each morning, as he drank his coffee, he looked at it and smiled. Life had come full circle. He had once been the one to offer support, and now he realized he'd received just as much in return. Years went by. Emily got married, and Sophie eventually opened her own design studio. They all stayed in touch, visiting each other from time to time. Every holiday season, Sophie would send Michael a handwritten card. One year it read, "Your wisdom still guides me, even when you're not there. Thank you for being my safe place." Michael smiled every time he read it. He had long accepted that what they shared wasn't a story of forbidden love, but of emotional healing to people from different generations who had crossed paths at the right time and reminded each other how to live again. One spring evening, Years later, he sat on the same porch where it all began. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of distant laughter from a family walking by. He thought about everything, the loneliness after his wife passed, Emily growing up, Sophie's laughter echoing through the house. I felt a deep sense of peace. He realized that not every powerful story ends with romance. Some end with understanding, with quiet companionship, with a kind of love that doesn't need labels or confessions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he whispered to himself, I didn't lose her. I just helped her find her wings. Inside, the framed sketch still hung on the wall, a symbol of a bond that had changed them both forever. And as the night settled, Michael smiled, knowing that sometimes the most meaningful relationships in life are the ones that never needed to be defined, just felt